For the first time in generations, VGC might finally have a new top tier fire type. Scarlet and Violet has given us plenty of new options, and it feels like right now there are currently about 10 really noteworthy fire types that you could actually consider using on teams. While everything here isn't necessarily going to be considered for the best fire type, I do want to go over these 10 options as I feel like they're all options that you might actually consider using in your teams in Regulation F. Currently, I'm only going to discuss things that either have proven results or at least in previous formats had enough proven results against Pokemon currently trending in the metagame to where we can actually get a really good basis on if they'll even be viable going forward. Sorry, Armor Rouge players, I'm just going to use Iron Crown going forward for my tie spam teams, so I'm not counting it for this video. With all that said, let's get started on our search for the best fire types in VGC right now. I want to start off today's video by going over some more niche Pokemon that could be technically considered honorable mentions, but none of these would be Pokemon I would ever expect to see truly as the best fire type. And I would consider this Pokemon cluster to be none other than Magmar, Heatran, Volcarona, and Torkoal. Let's start off with Magmar. As compared to a lot of the other options on today's list, it's a lot harder to justify this if you aren't currently playing or watching VGC games. But Magmar actually has a lot of benefits right now. Let's start off with its signature item of Violet, which while this isn't exclusive to Magmar, it's one of the only Pokemon currently running it unless you're using Porygon 2, which would never really be on the same team. Magmar typically will benefit from options though like Follow Me, which in tandem with its ability Flame Body, can actually be a really devastating combination in order to cripple a lot of physical threats. And unlike a move such as Rage Powder, you can't just throw on a Safety Goggles or a Defensive Terra Grass to get around this. I think Magmar at least has a really good role on a lot more of the bulky offensive playstyles, as we've even seen this make day 2 results already in current formats, though it's yet to really get itself a strong top 8 finish. But for now, this probably is the weakest option on today's list, as despite having a lot lower usage, I actually think that Volcarona has a lot more merit in this current format. Now that might be a bit weird, as Volcarona is actually the only Pokemon on today's list that has not only 0 top 8 results right now, but also 0 day 2 finishes. But Volcarona has always proven to be a much more situational option, and I think it matches up very well into a lot of current threats. With movesets like Terra Dragon and Quiver Dance, you could prove to make this a very phenomenal win con, especially with the decrease in Heatran usage significantly compared to Regulation E and D. So Volcarona actually is a much better time due to the lack of a strong Flash Fire user. Not only this, but Volcarona actually can still be a good support Pokemon. And you can use moves like Rage Powder and Struggle Bug to really try and mitigate what your opponent might actually manage to do against your team. I think Volcarona still has a place in the format. It's just a very underexplored Pokemon, but it has seen good results in the past, and I fully expect it to at some point in this current format. For our 2 stronger contenders in this camp, let's start off with Torkoal, which is a lot more self-explanatory. Torkoal's already gotten a strong top 8 result as of right now, and it's a really good partner for a lot of Sun teams. This is going to start a trend where a lot of current fire types in the format do actually run a second fire type in their team, and Torkoal is a really great second fire type to throw on most teams due to the fact that it will boost the Sun for your better option. With options like Heat Wave and Eruption being great if you're going to use this on Trick Room, and moveset options like Yawn and Helping Hand being great for the more supportive roles Torkoal can fill, Torkoal is actually a really good Pokemon right now, but I do think that it would be completely overlooking all of the options it makes really good to say that this suddenly is the best fire type in the format. Finally, we do have one Pokemon that actually fell off a lot from Regulation E, being none other than Heatran. I'm not really sure what specifically made Heatran fall off, but it's honestly just not holding up as well as it used to. Typically, you would find Heatran running options like Life Orb and Assault Vest movesets, and these can prove really deadly still, or even a moveset with Citrus Berry can still prove to be very useful, as Heatran's typing with the Fire and Steel typing, as well as the ability Flash Fire, all really benefit Heatran a lot. This gives you a lot of great options in a most common Pokemon, and with Terra typing such as Dragon, Fairy, and Grass all being extremely viable, it's really hard to say that Heatran doesn't have a place in the format. But compared to our other 6 Pokemon in today's video, I don't think it comes close to being a top tier fire type right now. Despite the fact that all 4 of these Pokemon are more circumstantial though, I think it really does a good job at showing what a fire type will typically do for a team. And I think we've kind of outlined all of those roles on at least one section of these Pokemon, though going forward, all 6 of our future Pokemon will actually be able to encompass both roles simultaneously, being a great support piece for teams while also dealing immense damage. Up next, I want to go over the runner-up category for fire types, as despite this group only encapsulating 3 of our next 6 Pokemon, I really think that the top 3 options all technically could be in the actual spot depending on your personal preference. From worst to best though, I do want to start off with our more inconsistent option being none other than Gouging Fire. Now Gouging Fire is a bit of a weird one, as I think the meta is actually trending more favorably for Gouging Fire right now, but currently I would still consider this a lot more circumstantial compared to our other 2 options here. Gouging Fire is an incredible defensive typing of Fire and Dragon, which means it's a fire type that doesn't even need to Terra to get rid of its weakness to Urshifu, and it also has a great 4 times resistance to Rillaboom, which is one of the best Pokemon right now. Not only this, but with Photosynthesis, you can take advantage of both an attack and a speed boost depending on your archetype, meaning you can either go for a really fast Gouging Fire that can deal off more supportive rolls or even Dragon Dances quicker, and also a more wall-breaking focused one that can just completely break past most defensive counterplay. With Burning Bulwark and Breaking Swipe specifically, Gouging Fire proves to be one of the best ways to mitigate physical damage, as unlike future options in this list, you don't need to switch out to continuously weaken your opponents. I do think that for item spot though, this is where Gouging Fire becomes a little bit more consistent. Since you always need to pick one of these two to have any serious Gouging Fire set, options like Clear Amulet will typically be used to try and mitigate the incoming Intimidate that you might face, though that does mean giving up a booster energy, which is a much more easy way to proc the Photosynthesis. Technically, you can just throw in a Torkoal or another Pranks or Sunny Day option like Tornadus on this team to fix the Photosynthesis issue on Clear Amulet sets, but with other options that you might face such as Tyranitar, Alola Ninetales, Pelipper, and especially Tornadus with Rain Dance, it's not really a consistent way to keep this sort of boost with Photosynthesis. So I do think that Gouging Fire does definitely have some serious issues when it comes to that item slot. Despite this though, I do see the meta trending favorably for it, as with Ferrograph Rising, a lot of our more priority focused fire types might fall out of favor, leaning towards the speed boosting Gouging Fires with Dragon Dance being the actual real strong contender here, as these can keep up a really fast high damage outputting option with Flare Blitz, while still also having the booster speed to outpace most opposing Pokemon and the Sun Boost to boost your damage even further. We have both better damage mitigators and better wall breakers right now, and I want to start off by going into our two much better wall breakers, being none other than Chi-Yu and Ogerpon Hearthflame, which definitely, in my opinion, are a lot more similar in how they play. But I can't lie, I'm sure that most of you guys are already jumping into the comments before I even explain why they're down here, saying that you thought that these should be in the top set of Pokemon. Now, starting off with Chi-Yu, as I do think this is a much more clear-cut example, Chi-Yu has never really been the definitive best fire type ever since Regulation D, and it instead proves to just be a fire type among many that is always going to be a threat. Chi-Yu is a fairly unique option, and it typically does benefit a lot, especially attacking-oriented teams, with options like Choice Scarf and Choice Specs typically being your item choices here. You're going to always see Overheat, Heat Wave, Dark Pulse, and Snarl on your moveset, with the occasional Terra Blast over Snarl, as this gives Chi-Yu a really great way to not only mitigate opposing special attackers, but with Beads of Ruin, you just passively enable any sort of special offense that your team might control. Overall, this proves to be very useful on specially oriented teams, and it's why Pokemon like Fluttermane and Raging Bolt do see a lot of success with Chi-Yu. And with the increase in special offense with Raging Bolt, Iron Crown, and Landorus Incarnate all rising significantly in usage this gen, I can't imagine that the Regulation F format is not going to be very kind to Chi-Yu. Frankly, I think it's the best format we've actually seen for Chi-Yu since Regulation C, but it's still far from being the best fire type. Meanwhile, I think Ogerpon Hearthflame actually falls in a much similar camp to Chi-Yu, as it does tend to be the more physically oriented wall breaking option for most players, with options like Ivy Cudgel, which has high crit rate, and also your Terra Fire, which on Ogerpon specifically will give you an attack boost thanks to Embody Aspect. This proves to be a great option for most teams, and while a lot of players have typically opted away from the more supportive roles Ogerpon can provide, and instead giving Hearthflame Sword Stance, Ivy Cudgel, a grass move, which is typically either Grassy Glide or Horn Leech, and then Spiky Shield, you can still see movesets running around that ditch Sword Stance instead for Follow Me, which can give you a really fast offensive option that can also try and force your opponent to have to respect the Follow Me play, which if they get wrong will punish them greatly, as they'll either have to attack into Ogerpon with moves that will most likely be resisted, or instead have to take an Ivy Cudgel that can completely massacre one of their best Pokemon. These two have a lot of benefits for teams, and you can even see them ran very successfully with a lot of common fire types on dual fire teams, with Chi-Yu benefiting a lot from Torkoal and Ogerpon benefiting a lot from really any fire type as a second option. It's really hard to actually say that these Pokemon are not going to see play this format, and both will be very high contenders going forward. For our final group of fire types, we do have 3 more fire types, and I think any of these 3, if you were to say you personally felt were the best option, I don't really think I could fight it too much, but I have my own personal rankings for these. All 3 of these Pokemon are by far incredible damage output options that are a lot more consistent than our previous ones, while still having really good supportive options that can just kind of exist on these Pokemon as a really good way to still enable other threats if they have a bad matchup. I'm gonna break these down from worst to best, starting with our 3rd place candidate being none other than Entei. Now, for anyone who only tuned into Portland Regionals, you might be shocked to see that Entei is ranking this low among our best fire types today, but I do think that Entei still has a lot going for it. You're going to typically see Choice Band and Assault Vest movesets, with Choice Band being more favorable on the in-game ladder, as it's a really good partner for Chien-Pao with Terra Normal E-Speed, as well as Sacred Fire, Flare Blitz, and Stomping Tantrum. But Assault Vest typically has a lot higher success when it comes to the tournament play, with Assault Vest movesets typically ditching your Flare Blitz for more of a utility focused move like Snarl. Entei is going to typically use Terra Normal on the Bandit sets and then Terra Grass on the Assault Vest builds, as this is a really great way to typically get past a lot of common Entei counterplay for Assault Vest sets such as Landorus Incarnate. Overall, Entei is a really good Pokemon, and especially with Inner Focus getting around Intimidate, I do think it's an option that you really do need to respect. And the Assault Vest sets are probably one of the best ways currently to get around the common Shiyu and Fluttermane lead that still is ever present, and with Terra Grass especially giving you a really good check to Raging Bolt's Thunderclap, this proves to be a great Pokemon. However, with Ferrograss Rising, I think Entei will actually fall a lot in usage, as it's very priority reliant to really justify its placement on teams over other options in the tier, but it's a really good fire type that can at least get past one of our top two Pokemon. Our runner-up today honestly is going to shock most of you. It's not Ogerpon, it's not Shiyu, and it's not even Entei. So just what fire type actually manages to rank above all of these behemoths? Now, despite this somehow making the second best placement on our list today, I'm pleased to report that Hisuian Arcanine has managed to escape the fraud allegations going into Regulation F. With top 8 results in every event so far, Hisuian Arcanine has not fallen off, and despite the fact that it is no longer winning events, the fact that it's still competing at this high of a level despite Incineroar existing is pretty amazing. I personally never really saw the argument that this Pokemon would completely die out when Incineroar came back, as it's one of the only Intimidate Pokemon that can not only manage to have a positive matchup into Incineroar, but also it has a really good niche to outright compete for usage with it. An option like Landorus is still a really good partner with Incineroar for the Therian form, as they can both Intimidate Shuffle very easily, but with Hisuian Arcanine not only matching up positively into both thanks to its Rock Stab combination, it can also actually justify just being a replacement for Incineroar due to the fact that it is a much more aggressive fire-type intimidator, and I think they do play very differently for a lot of players. Currently, we're seeing a lot of Terra Fairy Choice Banded movesets with options like Head Smash, Rock Slide, Flare Blitz, and Extreme Speed, as these typically do benefit a lot from the general good defensive typing that Fairy provides, while having insane offense from Head Smash, which is a lot better into most teams due to the fact that all of our current rock resists either are weak to fire or they're neutral to rock right now, since most ground types don't resist rock anymore, which gives this Pokemon a really strong place in the current format. Extreme Speed also gives you a great priority option, and while it is slower than Entei, it's at least faster than Dragonite, and it gives you a still really good ability into most opponents, which makes Hisuian Arcanine still a very justifiable option. It's a really good overall offensive partner next to teams like Chien-Pao, and it's a really good Intimidate Pokemon for a lot of really aggressive archetypes. But I do think that despite the benefit from moves like Snarl and Will-O-Wisp on Hisuian Arcanine, right now it's just not the best moveset you can be using. That's not to say these movesets aren't viable, but typically you're going to find these options more suited for our number one candidate. So Hisuian Arcanine has defined its placement by instead just really being an aggressive wall breaker, and it still does a great job at this in my opinion. Despite the fact that Incineroar has still kept its number one placement, I do think that this is actually a lot more contentious compared to previous formats. Now, Incineroar is still the number one fire type that you could be using. There's no doubt about it. It has a lot of great success with both Portland and Liverpool regionals having been won by this Pokemon, and for good reason too. With moves like Fake Out, Parting Shot, Knockoff, and Flare Blitz all establishing themselves as really high profile options on Incineroar, with Fake Out being a great utility option to slow down most opponents, Parting Shot being a great damage control in tandem with Intimidate, and then Flare Blitz and Knockoff being strong primary stabs here. And you still even have a lot of other more situational moves such as U-Turn, Helping Hand, Snarl, and Will-O-Wisp that can all find themselves under the right team. But I do think that unlike previous generations, Incineroar is no longer the considered best fire type, objectively speaking. Right now, I think there's a lot of Pokemon that actually can match up positively in Incineroar, and I no longer think that it is an end-all be-all Pokemon on any given good competitive team. You can still throw a Clear Mill on any team that's very weak to Incineroar. With Terra, you can get around it very easily, and if you're forcing Incineroar to Terra, that's also a pretty big net positive, as it's not a Pokemon that typically wants to Terra on most teams and instead has to in order to respond to better play. And then you also have the fact that there's just a lot of better fire types in Scarlet and Violet right now. While they're not necessarily better than Incineroar, it's been a while since we've had this many other contenders for the number one fire type, and in most generations previously, if it wasn't Heatran, you were running Incineroar as your definitive fire type, and that's a good thing. With Ogerpon, Shiyu, Hisuian Arcanine, and Entei all finding a lot of success right now, with Entei's being more reliant due to the current format, and the other three just being all prolific options generally speaking, I think it's a really good thing that Incineroar finally has some actual competition for this spot. And while today I do still rank Incineroar as the number one fire type, if I was to make this video in 3 months, that might actually change. I think it's going to be something that only time will tell, but currently I think that Incineroar is still the definitive best option for most teams, and it should at least be the option you're starting to look at if you're looking for just a fire type. But once you dig a little bit deeper, you might find that it might not be the best fire type for your given team. And I hope that I've maybe outlined an option that you might be looking to consider for any future events you might be doing. Hopefully you guys were able to learn something for today's video, and if you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. Shout out to Kurt, who did an incredible job editing today's video as always, as he always kills it on the content. And if you enjoy this type of editing, check out Kurt, who does an incredible job on all of his own content. Also, let me know what fire types I might have missed down below, as I'm sure that I probably missed a fire type that you've had a lot of success with, and I'd love to see what you guys are using right now in terms of really strong fire type options. I'll see you guys next week. Until then, peace out, guys.